Welcome back to another edition of What's Your Story? This is just a little series we're doing in the Mid-America Union, talking to some of our members, learning more about their journey growing up in America and growing up and being part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And today, a wonderful guest today, Joann Herrington. I first got acquainted with Joann about 5 years ago because she has been sitting on the Mid-America Union Executive Committee for, well, this is at least your second term, right?
Yes, it is.
And she's a wonderful committee member, always has good insights, asks good questions, just one of those very reasonable minds that you're glad to have on your committee. And so that's how I first got acquainted with her. But then, as I've learned more about her, she has quite a history and quite a background working with young people. And I learned something about you, too, just before I came down.
What was that?
I learned she's a master at playing the piano and quite a musician. And you have written songs.
Yes.
And we're going to have to hear some of those, Joann. But that's wonderful. I've always wanted to play the piano, but it was just not anything that God did not give me the gift. So,
well, if you go to an adventurer gathering, the theme song for the adventurers.
Really?
We are adventurers.
You wrote that?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
So a lot of my music is for children.
Yeah. Well, children have been a big part of your life, haven't they?
They have.
Yeah. And you've also done a lot of work in the area of math for our kids, too, haven't you?
Yes. Later in my career, almost at the end of it, I taught for 41 years. And about 5 years before I retired, I decided that I wanted to learn more about math and go more in depth. And so I went to the University of Nebraska and was enrolled in a program, and it was called Primarily Math. And you come out with your specialist certification for math for grades K through 3.
Wow.
And so I just wanted my kids to have every advantage.
That's tremendous. Well, as you can see, she's a person of many talents and great depth, and we're glad that she's here. So we're just going to go back to the beginning, Joann. We would love to hear about where you were born and raised, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your parents and your family as well.
I'd love to do that. My parents were Arthur and Leona Harrington, and they joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, my mother joined right before I was born. And my father, I'm rather infamous in the family. My father took his stand, as people say, to join the church and to follow the full teaching of the Bible when I was about 3 months old. And I guess I was making a ruckus in church, and my mother stepped out with me, and that's when he went forward, so she missed it. But they became Adventists. The thing about my parents that I have always admired, they're both gone now, but in fact today is the date of my mother's birth, September 2nd. Wow. But the thing that I love about them and have tried to do in my life, to replicate in my life, is the fact that when they joined the church, they had already been Christians, but they felt they had come to more full and complete understanding of the Bible with the seventh-day Sabbath and all of that. And so when they joined the church, they just said, whatever the Lord shows us, that's what we're going to do. And so that included Christian education for us. I was born in Omaha and had the good fortune of being raised at the Sharon Seventh-day Adventist Church there in Omaha. Wonderful church for nurturing young people in my generation, and we were involved as young people in the life of the church. I played for the full church service by the time I was 12 years old. I was a pianist and an organist, and so there were about 3 of us who were around my age. I was the youngest of them, but the other one was about 15 years old, and she played the full service, played Handel's Messiah at 15 years old. Wow. We were exposed, we had the wonderful fortune of having a wonderful choir director. And so not only did I learn in my regular music lessons that my parents enrolled me in, but we had done Seven Last Words, the Messiah, and all of those things before I ever went to academy. So I had wonderful exposure. We were also junior deacons and deaconesses and Sabbath school teachers. We'd have youth day, and then the young people were in charge, and I was a teenager during that time. And so we would teach the Sabbath school, someone would speak. We were involved in temperance, orations and jingles and posters, all those things. Pathfinders. We had a wonderful Pathfinder leader in our church. He took us camping and all of that, and taught us lots of things about that. And then we'd go, usually Sabbath afternoon, we'd go out to the place we were going to camp, and we'd be there over Saturday night, and then our parents would come out Sunday morning. Our mothers would come and cook breakfast and all of that. So it was a wonderful, wonderful time. Not without problems, of course, sure. But I feel very fortunate to have the parents that I had. I had 4 brothers, and I'm the only girl. I was the youngest for a while. I like to tell my brother I was the queen until the usurper came. but I was the 4th of 5 children, and then my little brother came along. So.
So growing up there in the Sharon Church with your family, your parents, did they teach you anything about racism as a young child? Did you learn anything about racism from them?
I did, through asking questions. I don't recall just sitting down and having a conversation about them initiating a conversation about racism with me. But as we children ask questions or observe things in society, in the church, all of those types of things at school, then they would talk to us about different issues. Then we would sit down and have a conversation. I noticed that our church was mostly African Americans, maybe 1 or 2 Caucasian people in our church. And so, of course, when you're a child, whatever you grow up with, you think is how everything is. But then I went to church school, and I noticed that they went to one church and I went to another. And there were a few families that would come and visit at our church and mix and mingle and have conversations. But it was pretty much, this church was over here, that church was over there. And I think my generation was maybe the first generation that got to go to the church school, because there was dissension in the Nebraska Conference church school as to whether we could come. And so I wasn't aware of that when I was a student there, because I started in the 1st grade. Okay. And so children aren't aware of those issues and those discussions that are taking place on boards and committees. But my parents were, I found out later, my parents were aware of that. But yet they chose, they said, we believe that you need to be in church school, and that's where you're going to be. That's
quite a commitment. What do you think of when you hear someone use the phrase that, well, I'm colorblind?
Let me get to that question. I'm going to, there's something I wanted to say about your last question to me, if I may.
Sure.
I do recall my parents initiating conversations with my brothers. Okay. And I'm sure that now that there's more racial awareness, maybe most people know that young men have to have the talk, and the talk is not about human reproduction. Right. The talk is about what to do if you're stopped by police, or if you're out at night, those types of things. And I remember my parents talking very sternly to my brothers about what to do, what not to do, so that they came home alive.
That's really, I'm really glad you shared that. It's only for me about 7-8 years ago when I started having a number of colleagues who were people of color. and we would talk, between meetings, and I'd hear a little bit about their journey, and then I would hear about the talk that you just spoke about that their parents had, and then I heard experiences that they had from policemen, even people very close to us here, growing up in my home. The talk about getting stopped by a policeman is, don't do it because we don't want our insurance to go up with the ticket. It was never do this or that so you come out alive. And that's one of the huge differences my colleagues and I had in our journeys that I had no idea until. So I'm really glad you shared that. So you heard your parents giving them the talk, and that's interesting that your parents did that. That's good.
Right, that was back in the 60s. So.
Yeah. So you just talked a little bit about the talk that your brothers received. You hear people say a lot, well, because they're not racist. They don't think. They say, "Well, I'm colorblind." What do you think of when you hear people use that phrase?
I've heard a lot of people say that. They say, I don't see color, I just see people. I just see, people are just people, and I never pay attention to what color they are. And that's concerning because I am a black person, or someone might be Native American or Latinx, or, I think it's something that we should notice. It'd be like me walking into a garden and saying, I don't see roses or carnations or daisies. I mean, flowers are flowers, aren't they? I miss the richness and the unique beauty of each flower because I'm not appreciating those attributes that each flower has that are different from another flower. And so I know that sometimes the intention is good, and so I try not to judge someone on the basis of that statement, but I hope that people can understand that my culture is, we learn as educators that culture trumps about everything. Just about everything. I won't say, the Holy Spirit can always work in wonderful ways and change people in different ways. But how we are raised, the mores and the customs and the foods and the norms of our culture are what shapes us. And so to say that you don't see that is not necessarily a compliment. Or appreciate that, And I know we use the word tolerant, and tolerance is not a bad word, but it kind of implies I will be very magnanimous and accept you for who you are, no matter what And so I remember one of my students saying that as I was teaching college, and they were education students, so I feel like I need to make them aware. And they were saying, I accept my students no matter if they are, English speaking or not, or, And I said, well, I'm a Nebraskan, and I'm accepting you because you're from, and then I named their state. And I said, but it's okay. I understand. I accept you. And I said, do you see how that kind of sounds a bit condescending? Because there are wonderful things about your state that are great and make you who you are. And so there are things about them speaking this language or coming from this other culture that make them great. Not just tolerating it, but actually saying, wow, this is great, let's celebrate it.
I love that, boy. I loved your words. If you're just tolerant, then you're obviously, you don't like something that you're putting up with. But you use the word celebrate. And that's what I think is really beautiful. I really appreciate you bringing us to that with that word.
Well, I think that sometimes, like I said, people do mean well.
I think
Me saying that, I also want to look at the other side and have some balance to that of, I'm not going to jump to being totally offended if somebody says that, but I will try to bring some awareness, I think, in a kind and Christian way of saying, hey, let's kind of shift the focus on that from homogeneous, to the variety that exists. The other thing about that is if we don't see that, we are missing some valuable resources.
Amen.
And that can be brought to bear on whatever we're focusing on as a church, as a school, as a company.
We're just better together.
Right.
We are just better together. You mentioned a little bit about the talk your brothers had, and obviously that's an area where racism could affect their life. I don't know if it ever did, but it could have. How has racism affected your life, your journey?
That's probably a longer conversation than we can have today. But I think as you made me aware of the questions that you might be asking me. And as I thought about it, I thought about some examples that I could talk about. One of which was I attended an Adventist academy, and that was a culture shock. To go from being a city girl to living in the country. I didn't sleep for the first 2 days, nights really, because it was so quiet. And then a train rumbled by, I think the second night. I was like, thank you. I hear some noise because it's just city sounds. You hear cars and whatever, And it was just so quiet. And the activity level was different. All of it. It was just a different environment. And I found that some people had certain ideas of who I was, but yet they didn't really know me. I had an advisor. I remember the advisor talking to me about the Carnegie units, and those were used to determine, if you had finished your high school course successfully. There was a track for if you wanted to graduate, but you weren't necessarily interested in enrolling in college, and then there was college prep track. And I remember him saying to me, don't worry about taking the college track. You'll probably want to take this track. And I talked to my parents about it because I had always heard from my parents, yeah, you're going to college, and all of those things. And so in talking to them, they said, no, don't let that person deter you from your goal. Your goal is to go to college, and you make sure that he understands that that's the track that you want to take. Those are the courses that you want to enroll in. And so I felt that his expectation was that because I was black, I probably wasn't going to go to college. And
how did that make you feel?
I'm a quietly feisty person. In that, if you tell me I'm not, I'm probably bound to do it then. I've just got to do it then. So I determined, in my mind and in my heart, I was going to college because I knew I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher necessarily. I knew I wanted to be either a librarian, a journalist, or a teacher. I wasn't sure of which, but I knew that for any of those, I wanted to go to college and be a college graduate. So I went in there and said, my parents, I had my parents backing so I could say, my mom and dad said I need to take the college preparatory course because I was taught to be very respectful to adults and to those who were in authority over me as a minor child. So, but with my parents' encouragement, then I was able to get my courage up and go speak to the teacher and say what I wanted to do.
Good.
another way I think that racism has affected me is that when I was in school, we were not allowed to mix or mingle when I was at the academy level. So there was one black guy beside my brother who was there my first year of school at the academy, and then he graduated. But then everybody was all excited about the banquet. Everybody's talking about what they're going to wear and who they're going to go with. And the tradition at that time was, I look at it now and think, oh my word. But the letters came from the boys' dormitory to the girls' dormitory, and some girls got 2 or 3 letters of invitation to the banquet and all of that. And so, you kind of feel left out. I don't think that anybody was being racist by doing that, but I think the system itself had some racism built in because we were made to understand that none of the boys could ask. There were 2 of us, my roommate and I, were the 2 black girls in the dorm, and it was made plain that they could not invite us, even though we were all friends and classmates and all of that. And so I don't think it was on the basis of the students, but the administration.
Well, you've done a lot in the church. You've taught school. You've been a principal. You've been a superintendent of education.
Yeah.
You not only went on to college, but you got your master's, I believe, and then several specialty endorsements. And the Lord has really blessed you and used you. How about in the church? Have you seen and been affected by racism within the church?
Well, in education, we have something that's called, that we deal with a lot as educators, and it's called cognitive dissonance. And that's when you have a belief and then something else comes along to challenge that belief. And usually it's a good thing because we as educators know how to help students balance that dissonance and to resolve that dissonance in a way that helps them to move forward. In the church, I found that I had cognitive dissonance because people that I would see in leadership as elders or deacons or teachers or even preachers sometimes, in the church, you're supposed to love God, and if you love God, then you're supposed to, that's our vertical relationship, and then our horizontal relationship is with one another. And so I saw these people saying how much they loved God, but then when we got to the horizontal part, something was missing. And I saw active racism taking place where people were not allowed to do this or to do that, or kept out, not included, spoken down to, or actively, people being mean and angry or something like that. And as a child, it was very hard for me to put that together. Like, why is that person acting that way? Because they're in the church. They're supposed to love God and everything. And so I would ask my parents things about that, about things like that, pardon me. And they just said, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. As the old spiritual says, there are some people who are in the church, but they're not yet converted by the love of Christ. And when I was a child, they would say, let us handle that. When these situations come up, you come to us. We will go and take care of that. And they did do that sometimes when I was in grade school and academy. College, same thing. It was just kind of sad to see some people. Then as I grew up, by the time I'm in college, I came to college. I had just celebrated my 17th birthday when I was graduating from academy. I'm born in March, so in March. I turned 17, so I was kind of a young
You were.
student coming. I was not, long. It wasn't long after I turned 17 that I was here at Union College. So that had something to do with it too, understanding things, because as we mature, then our understanding grows and we're better able to handle things. I felt that my parents were very instrumental in helping me to understand and to navigate some of the situations that occurred while I was here. Some of it was outright people calling you names, epithets, and things like that.
School.
At a Christian school.
That's hard. That's tough.
But some of my best friends are the people that I went to academy with.
Sure.
We're still close. We stay in touch. We visit one another. We've seen each other through all of life transitions, and the weddings and the babies and the all of it, and the loss of parents and all of those types of things. So I think more good came out of it than bad, but there were some notable things. And I sometimes it's still hard for me, even in this. I just didn't think we'd be here in 2020 at this point where we're having to demonstrate and having to say to people, Black lives matter. They do matter. And it's, sometimes I think, I thought we were past this. I thought, and then as Christians, when you add that layer of religion over it, that raises the stakes to me so much higher, because this is not just about social behavior. This is a salvific issue. Because if you don't love other people the way that Christ loves other people, then you've got a problem. So I've resolved some of it, that some of it is human behavior, some of it is what was going on at the times in society as a whole, and people in the church were mirroring that, even though they shouldn't have. But as I grew up and then started finding out, oh, this person couldn't eat in the general conference cafeteria, you're kidding me? Or this person couldn't do that, or this person couldn't do that. And then my own experience throughout school and throughout the work. I worked for the regional conference for many years. I've worked for non-regional conferences for several years. I experienced some hard times from some supervisors that I felt was race-driven. And I just finally said, I choose not to engage. And so I've taught in public schools, I've taught in church schools. I felt sometimes that I needed to do that, because if I stayed working for the church and experiencing racism, then that was going to affect my walk with God, my Christianity. And so sometimes I kind of backed away a little bit. But more good experience than bad, I'll say that.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. So you've shared your experience. You I think, went to Platte Valley Academy, it sounds like, because in Nebraska. And then you went to Union College. You worked for state conferences. You worked for regional conferences. So I know that there were times that you would enter a room, a classroom or a school or church, and you were the only person of color in that room. How did that make you feel? What was that like?
Actually, because of my childhood and having gone to a state conference school for most of my childhood, and then academy, the same thing, and then college, the same thing, I had a wide swath of people that I knew from all kinds of places, okay? And so most of the time when I walked in somewhere, it was in a role, often as a musician, which kind of paved the way for you, because you're coming in to do something for worship, either singing or playing or in a choir or in a group. So part of it was that. The other part is that my parents also had a wide swath of acquaintances across many cultures. And so I grew up knowing lots and lots of people. And I'm an introvert at heart, but I do enjoy meeting and having conversations with people. So I wasn't that uncomfortable. Unless something happened, and I do remember going to a church and I had the solo on one of the numbers. We were on a choir tour, and a lovely lady came up afterwards and I just so enjoyed your singing. It was just beautiful. And I said, well, praise the Lord. Thank you so much. And she said, I just can't wait to come over to your side of heaven and listen to you people sing.
Oh my, okay.
And I was just speechless. I just thought, what? There was that cognitive dissonance again. I was just thinking, what are you talking about? And,
even as a young person, you saw that, and that's something. Yeah. Wow. So, well, how has God helped you deal with systematic racism that we have in our culture? Or how is he still working with you on that area, on that topic?
God is still working with me. I realized this year, in fact, with all of the things that have happened, there was one particular incident that recently happened, the death of Mr. Floyd, and I just could imagine if that was one of my brothers or one of the many friends that I have, or one of my church brothers, with somebody's knee on their neck pleading and saying, please don't kill me. And yet, just looking straight into a camera, somebody just goes, I'm going to kill you. I was horrified, and I was so upset about it that, and it upset other people. And so I was getting lots of things on Facebook and emails saying, can I talk to you about this? From people of other cultures, from mostly Caucasian friends. Mm-hmm. And I said that weekend, I cannot be responsible for educating you. I'm dealing with this myself. Get a book, read an article, but I'm just not available right now. And so it takes some processing, because when you think about it, you just say, why? Why are you doing this? And so my answer to that question is that we live in a world of sin. Satan is all about division. He is about cutting people off from each other. He's about, I've listened to people say from different parts of town, we don't associate with the people on the south side or the north side or the east side or the west side. We don't associate with this one or that one, or we don't associate with people who are, they may not say it, but they don't want to be around somebody poor, or I don't know. You name it, whatever situation, human situation there is, Satan will try to pit this situation against that situation and cause division, because if we're fighting each other, then our focus is not on doing what God wants us to do.
You said something earlier, being a master educator. You've learned in your studies and just probably by experience that culture trumps almost everything. What hope do you have that God can change a person's heart when it comes to these issues?
I think that's the thing that I pray about, is that sometimes I wonder if people can change. But as a Christian, it's the bedrock of my belief that God can change people. God, the Holy Spirit, is alive and well and working in the earth. And as long as the Holy Spirit is alive and well and working in the earth, then people can change. The question is are people willing to allow, the Spirit of Christ to be in their heart, to look at who they really are, to ask God to show them who they really are, to have the cultural, and a friend just made me aware of this book and the phrase that it's talking about, which is cultural humility. Not assuming that you understand everything about someone, because what we tend to do is, in an attempt to have multiculturalism, then we get together and we eat some salsa and chips and have a burrito and say, wow, we really, now we know about Latinx culture, we're good. Without really understanding the concerns, the difficulties, the things that culture celebrates about itself. Mm-hmm. Because unless I start knowing what is of value to you within your culture, I can't say I really understand your culture. And so I do hold out belief, yes, that people can change, that God's Spirit can move upon us and cause us to understand things and to see things that we of our own selves could not.
What do you think are the barriers that are there keeping minorities and Caucasians from working together successfully? And do you have any fears about working in that environment? You certainly have worked in that environment. But what are the barriers that we could learn about and do better about?
I think one of those things that we have to probably do is to start talking to each other and telling each other the truth. Mm-hmm. What we do is we experience something in cross-cultural communication, and then we go to our group, your group goes to your group, my group goes to my group, and then we tell our group, we already know what's good, what has happened, because probably it's happened to them too. Same thing on this side. But we don't come together and say, this is what happened, and then talk through that. That's when I think some progress will be made. Because as long as the conversation remains in separate circles, then we're just in a constant, it's just a problem. It just remains a problem. We never get the problem resolved. We never address the problem. We kind of almost, I hate to say this, revel in the problem, which sounds strange, because if it's a problem, we should want to get out of it and not just keep rolling around in it. But sometimes that's what happens, I feel. So I think one thing is we need to tell each other the truth, but the Bible says speak the truth in love. So most of the time, by the time people come together to talk about something, we are not in the love mode. Mm-hmm. we are coming together to have a knockdown, drag out. I'm going to tell you now how I feel because I'm so upset, And if we could start talking together before we reach that boiling point, that's when it will be productive, I feel.
That's very wise. Words of wisdom there. Before I move on to some more things along that line, just curious. Your parents had the talk with your brothers about getting pulled over. Did you ever have an experience getting pulled over by the police that when you finished, you went, wow, what happened here?
I left that experience very shaken. It happened right here in Lincoln. And I was coming home. I had my lights on. I was coming from Omaha, so it was getting dark, and I had my lights on coming from Omaha back to Lincoln. I decided to make a stop and make a purchase, So got out of the car, made the, lights are off and all that, car's off. When I got back in the car, I did not turn my lights on. It was twilight, I'll say that. It wasn't just really dark out, but it was time to probably have your lights on. And as I was driving, getting close to home, I saw the lights, and I thought it wasn't me at first, because I thought, I'm not speeding. I'm not, I can have a heavy foot sometimes, but I wasn't speeding, and I couldn't think of anything I was doing. So I thought, it's not me. There, as they started approaching, but then they got right behind me, and there was nobody else there, and so I thought, okay, it's me. So not wanting to clog up traffic on the main thoroughfare, I turned and stopped. And a female officer approached and asked me for my license, all that type of thing. And I said, what's the problem? I can't think of anything that... And then she left, went back and got another officer, male this time, and where have you been? Where are you going? Flashlight, looking around in the car. And I was starting to really get afraid at that point, because I thought, are they mixing me up with somebody, or has somebody done something that... Because they didn't say what the problem was. Finally found out it was because I didn't have my lights on. Called a friend, and I said, while they went back and, take your license, take your, all that information, and while they went back to the cruiser, I called the friend and said, I need you to get over here right now. And they came and parked right in front of me. And then the officer came back and said, oh, so you phoned a friend? And the tone was sort of, disrespectful. And I said, yeah, I did. I said, I was getting concerned. And then it was like, well, you didn't have your lights on. Gave me all my stuff back. Everything was over. But it was a frightening experience. It was kind of shook me up, because I thought, I don't know what they were really about, or was it the lights, or what was it all about?
The questioning where you've been and where you're going, and looking in your car. Right. That's not something they normally do for lights that aren't on, for sure. I want to get back a little bit to you. Joann, you've really given us some wonderful words of wisdom. I've really learned a lot, and I appreciate this. What do you wish your church could do more of to promote healing and reconciliation?
I almost feel like there needs to be, you've heard of the National Days of Prayer and those types of things. I just feel like as a church, we need to really humble ourselves and ask the Lord to help us with this problem of racism. It exists in the church. It is there. It should not be there. It is not compatible with the Spirit of Christ. And we need to be asking God to help us with this problem, because only a change of heart, governance doesn't do it. The 14th, I'm trying to go back to my civics, 14th Amendment or 13th Amendment that freed slaves and allowed, people to vote and all these types of things, and we're celebrating women being able to vote and all of that. Legislation is good, because then you have the law to fall back on and to hearken to and all of that, and say, I'm going to hold you accountable to the law. But the law does not change people's hearts. Long after all of these laws have been enacted, people are still doing things that are prejudicial and racist. And so it has to come from, it can't be extrinsic, it has to be intrinsic, and it has to be a heart change, a mind change, where you start looking at people through different eyes and not putting your own expectations and your own thoughts on them, you're looking at people for who they are. And I think only the Lord can help us do that. I hope that leadership will start initiating something. I think also we need to stop being silent about things. I'm glad that I think this kind of got started. Maybe you contacted me because I contacted you. I don't know. But I remember writing an email to you and saying, thank you for making a statement. For too long, the church said nothing as all of these things were going on. And I remember when in the 60s, it was like, well, don't protest, don't march, don't do this, don't do that. We as students couldn't join in marches or protests without discipline. So I think our church needs to be proactive in being anti-racist. I think our church needs to have a call to prayer on this issue where people are talking about it, thinking about it, dialoguing about it. I think we need to have more diversity in leadership. I know people are concerned about the situation between state conferences and regional conferences. My opinion on that is if the World Church, or the NAD in our case here in America, was dealing with evangelism of all people groups, there would not be a need. But there is a need to reach different people groups because, and Caucasian people and Latinx people and Asian people are all living in the cities. But we weren't doing big city evangelism. The state conferences were not doing that. The Net 96 and all of those types of things where we were looking at the big cities where people are, those came about in later years. And so I think we need to be concerned about the salvation of all people. Some people will go clear across the sea, and I'm like, okay, and on your way to the airport, you tripped over 45 people that need to know Jesus. And so, let's look around our neighborhoods. Let's look around for how we can impact our communities for God by reaching out to those who are marginalized, who are underserved, and not just in, okay, Thanksgiving we're going to do this, or Christmas we're going to do that, but regularly reaching out to those in prisons, regularly reaching out to people who are in food deserts, who are not having the education that they need for their children, who are not experiencing access to certain services and things like that in the community. How can we help? And get in there and find out the concerns, not just, here's what I'm going to present to you because I'm here to help you and here's how I'm going to help you. But what is it that you need? And then going back and sitting down with people and figuring out what that is, and then how to, our Sabbath school lesson brought out the steps and how to reach people and all of that, and that famous quote, he mingled with people, Jesus mingled with people and all of that. He did all of that before he said, follow me. And I think sometimes we just skip to the end and say, here's the truth, you need to accept it. But people don't feel that care, that love, that concern, and so they don't respond, and we wonder why they don't respond. And I think I guess as an educator, I just know that you cannot teach someone unless you gain their confidence and their trust. And I think that's what our church needs to do, is gain people's confidence and their trust.
That's wonderful. That's excellent. Just a couple more questions.
Okay.
What is something you wish your white brothers and sisters understood better about the African American journey here in America? What wisdom do you have for us to help understand? You said something earlier that was really key. You said, when you were processing the George Floyd issue and you had some of your friends from Academy who are Caucasian, life friends, reaching out, wanting to know how you were doing. What do I need to learn from this? And you made a statement that caught my ear. You said, you need to educate yourself. I think that's really true. But what are some steps to do that? And what other things would you have to say to help us understand better the journey of an African American here in America?
I believe that there is a resistance on the part of white America to understand that racism in America has been systemic. I'm hearing that issue debated on television, radio, wherever, private conversations. And it's almost incredulous to me that somebody cannot see that. If we're running a race and you have chains on your feet and a ball on there that's weighing 5 or 10 pounds, and I don't have that, how can we be in the same race? How can we be running the same race with any expectation on your part that you would ever win? That you would ever win. Not win sometimes, not win 1 out of 10, but that you would ever win. That is what people of color have faced here. Now, that being said, and you were saying, well, you've done this, you've done that. I've had some wonderful opportunities in life. God has blessed me, and the responsibilities that He's laid upon me, I never thought I'd be a superintendent of education. I mean, that was not my life goal. My goal, when my superintendent interviewed me when I was starting out teaching, he said, what do you want to do? And he was joking. He said, I bet someday you want my job. And I said, actually, I don't. I want to be a master teacher. That's what I want. So I've gotten to attain some of those things. And there is a responsibility on an individual's part to work toward their goals. I did not ask somebody to just say, make me superintendent of education. Sure. I haven't earned it. I haven't paid my dues. I haven't taught. I haven't gotten my graduate degree but just give me that. That's a whole different thing. What I'm saying is that I wish people knew how hard people of color sometimes have to work in order to get just a portion of what other people have. They've put in the effort. They've gotten the education. They've paid the dues, but it still doesn't come because of a system of oppression. I wish that people knew that just about every person of color that you could probably think of has been told by their parents, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get where somebody else is. Twice as hard. You're going to have to be twice as good. I've had friends who are nurses who have said, patients will say they don't want them as a nurse. And she said, if I wouldn't lose my job, I'd like to go in that room and say, I'm the one you want because I had to be twice as good to even get here. So probably I'm the one you want. I've had parents walk in to open house night. First time they meet me, go to the principal and say, I don't want my kid in that room. And I want to run down to the office and say, I'm the teacher you want because I had to go through this, and this to get here. And I'm on my game. I know what I'm doing. You want your child with me. But of course you can't say those things. But I just wish people knew, because people of color have to understand the majority culture as well as their own culture and navigate both of those successfully. So generally, they're a little more sometimes informed than people who only operate in one culture. Just as people who are bilingual or trilingual or whatever, they have a much wider world available to them to access than me who just speaks, than I who just speaks English, you know. Not speaking it very well right there, but anyway. I wish they knew we're enriched the wider our circle goes. I have been to a quinceañera. I have been to a Muslim wedding that was almost like the wedding in the Bible, where the bride sits. I mean, I went to this wedding at 4 o'clock, and I left the first half, you know, they were going to transition to another place, and so I took that opportunity to go on home. That was at 9:30. They were waiting for the bridegroom to come. I mean, it was just like the Bible. And all of that, and then, you know, they're veiled and everything. And so when they said, the bridegroom's coming, the ladies had been relaxed. They had taken off their hijabs and all of that. Everybody starts bustling. I was just sitting there. I was like, this is like the Bible. The bridegroom's coming. Everybody's getting ready. And then he came and, you know, all of that. It was so interesting. But I thought, I've been to a Vietnamese funeral of the father of one of my students, where, you know, they were beating the gong and then they do this and they offer the incense and what have you. It helped me to know my students better. And they believe in cremation, or at least this family did. And we were there in the crematorium. The mother kneeling there, my little 6-year-old student kneeling there, first grader. And they had to stand up and push the button to cremate Dad. Does she care about Dick, Jane, Spot, and Puff on the next day? I doubt it. You know what I mean? It helped me to understand. So when I have these cross-cultural experiences that are in no way related to the world that I know, it just enriches me. And I wish people understood that when you go out of your orbit, out of your little circle, get out of your little box, it's not a bad thing. It's really a wonderful thing, and it opens this whole world to you that is so much richer than it would be if you ever stayed in your own little space.
That's wonderful. That's awesome. So, I want to ask you a question, a curveball. You're not ready for this one. We didn't tell you about this one. But you've been in a lot of leadership positions.
Yes.
I think you're just a natural leader. Not only are you a person of color that was in leadership, but you're a woman. Did you face issues because you were a woman in leadership as well?
Yes, and I purposely had edited my comments. I said, because he was asking me about race. And I said, but I'm a woman, I'm a black woman. And so it all comes in one package. I can't separate just being a woman and being, but I'm both. So, oh my, there have been some challenges, yes. Our system is patriarchal, for the most part. I do see some breakthroughs, you know, of late, of women now in the pastorate and different things. I'm so happy about that because this is related to the racial issue. When kids are in school, they need to see people that look like them, no matter who they are. My issue was, at my school, I was the only African American teacher. Now, there were other people on staff, maybe one other one. Now, this is a school of over 800 kids. But the minority at my school, Gary, was Iraqi. There was not one teacher there that reflected their culture. there's something that happens. I mean, all the studies have shown this and all of that, that when we only see one type of person, or maybe even two, but we never see ourselves in that, then it's hard to visualize ourselves in that position. And so it would be hard for my students to visualize themselves being a teacher because they never saw that. When I just keep thinking God's Spirit cannot be contained in one gender, in one race, in one country, in one.
He was the creator.
I mean,
Sorry.
absolutely.
He was the creator, and he doesn't. Yeah, he creates beautiful things. That's what he did.
The other thing that I noticed is, as we've been responding to the crisis, the pandemic, worldwide pandemic, when you look at some of the countries that have handled this pandemic in a really, really excellent way, responding to it quickly, doing things that were helpful in cutting it down to, size where it's manageable and all of this, and it's just not all. New Zealand, led by a woman. Germany, led by a woman. What we see in history, and historians have written about this, is that in cultures where there were women in leadership, there were fewer wars, there was more collaboration. I think it's kind of in our nature more to do that, but I do believe that men have certainly specific gifts and all of that. I'm not saying it has to be all men, but just if we walked into the executive committee meeting and there were all women there, people would say, what is going on here? But for years, we walked into meetings where it was all men. And
nobody said a word.
It was fine.
Yeah.
Or it was all white, or it was,
Yeah,
and it was fine.
You talked about, how we're missing this whole sector of society when we don't tap into the different cultures and learn and experience each other. Well, I've said the same thing. I feel the same way about women. When you don't do that, you're just over half of your church, which is, our church has more women than men. We're missing that talent and leadership gifts that God has given them, and what a waste of human giftedness that God has made. Well, again, I wasn't supposed to. Yeah, we do.
And so we need both.
We need both. We need both. And anyway, that was a curveball. But I'm glad I asked you, because you that had come to your mind on your. So the last thing I want to ask you is, what did I not ask you that you wish I asked you?
Really, it was kind of very comprehensive questions about racial issues. I'm glad you asked me the one about what can the church do, because sometimes I think being Christians, we feel like, well, we know the end of the story. Everything's going to turn out all right. We're all going to go to heaven, and then we'll come down to the earth made new. It's going to be all wonderful. So, we're having a rough patch right here, and things are a little bumpy. It can almost lead to a complacency that, God's going to work it out, so we don't really need to do anything about this right now, do we? Because God's going to work it out. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I think we need to be proactive. I think that Jesus he said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Well, what are God's things? He said, do justly, love mercy. That's got to impact our social interactions amongst each other. and walk humbly. So if we're walking humbly, we're not going to think we're better than anybody. We're not going to think we're less than anybody. We're going to treat people as God would treat people. So I think you asked some great questions.
Well, Joann, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, you're a treasure. You're a treasure. And I'm blessed that our paths have crossed and that you work here with us on our executive committee, and the work you've done in our church and for young people inside our church and outside our church. You're just a blessing. And thank you for taking the time to come and be with us today.
You are welcome.
I know all those who will listen in will be blessed as well. Thank you.